Good morning, everybody. My name is Andy Bradley with Delta E, and welcome to this webinar this morning. I can see people are still joining the call, so we'll perhaps give it just a minute or two as people set themselves up to join the webinar today. We won't be going beyond the hour, so we'll try and keep the webinar to less than an hour. I'm sure everyone's got things to be going on too, so hopefully we can give you a couple of minutes at the end to get a cup of coffee or another drink before your next meeting for the day. I can see more people are still joining. Perhaps if we just go to the first slide, Lucy, just to introduce the presenters today. I'm joined by two of my colleagues from Delta E, John Ferris and Lucy. John and Lucy are the sort of the core of our flexibility and storage team at Delta E, and will be leading much of the presentation today, and indeed have led most of the work around the EMMES update this year. But also we're joined by two colleagues from EES, Jacopo and Susan, who will be presenting today primarily around the regulatory issues affecting energy storage in Europe. And you can see me on the right hand side there. I'm Andy Bradley, one of the directors of Delta E. So welcome to everyone who's joining. I can still see many people joining the call today. If you'd like to submit questions, please feel free to do that on the way as we go through. You'll see on the right hand side a panel, and at the bottom of that panel I think you'll see a questions tab. So just click on that, the arrow next to questions, and it will expand it, and you'll be able to submit your questions. Your questions will just come through to the presenting team, and we'll certainly try and pick up as many of those as we can, either as we go through or hopefully as we have a bit of time at the end of the webinar to come back and answer the questions. Unlikely we'll be able to answer every question, but we'll certainly try and pick up the ones that we have time to today. So we have over 100 people on the call now. I can see a few people still joining, but perhaps now it's just 3 minutes past. We'll kick off for the presentation. So just move on to the next slide, Lucy. So the agenda today, we do just brief introductions for those that may not know Delta E or EES, and Susan and John will sort of introduce the topic and set the scene. And then Jacopo will lead the section on the regulatory update, and then finally John and Lucy will lead the section on the market monitor, and we'll share with you some of the highlights and headlines coming out of our EMMES 6 report. So on to just a brief introduction. I'm sure many people on the call today know who Delta E are, so I won't labour this, but we cover many topics. The focus today will be the energy storage topic, obviously. John and Lucy lead our research around that topic, as well as the flexibility research that we do. But you can see that as a research consulting company, we cover many topics across the energy transition, from heating to e-mobility, hydrogen, and connected home, for example. So we're covering many topics, and we have research teams looking at all of those topics you see on the screen in front of you. And then just to briefly comment on something quite exciting that's happened with Delta E recently. We've become part of an organisation called LCP. LCP acquired Delta E just over a month ago now, and this creates an integrated energy transition team that can address the critical need for whole system thinking as we go through the energy transition. So I've just put on this slide an illustration of how we complement each other, a sort of simplification of the energy and power market. And LCP focus up to now has been very much on the upstream part, so looking at large-scale generation assets, networks, and small-scale generation assets, and they've been doing a lot of work around the revenue forecast, for example, for different types of assets like gas reciprocating engines or battery assets, pump storage, electrolyzers. Done quite a bit of work around long duration storage, and they have a software product called LCP Enact, which is used by energy traders in the intraday market. So very much focused on the upstream wholesale markets, whereas Delta E are more focused on the downstream side of the industry. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with our work around the distributed energy market, particularly on energy storage and other topics as well, but looking at business models, propositions, and the competitor landscape. So together we're really very complementary businesses, and we together we can build an energy transition practice that really combines the upstream and the downstream, and I think makes a unique offering within the energy transition space. So really exciting development, and we'll be able to take forward over the next months and years our business in new directions. If you'd like more information on that, there's a couple of links you see on this slide around LCP, and also some details around the merger of our businesses. But just briefly wanted to profile that for those that weren't familiar with it. So just move on to the next slide, and Susan, you were going to briefly introduce EASE.
Great, thanks, Andy. So yes, just a brief introduction to EASE. We're the European Association for Storage of Energy. We're established in 2011. We are the leading member-supported association, so we represent over 60 organizations active across the entire energy storage value chain. So this includes anything from utilities, technology providers, all the way to TSOs and DSOs. And our EASE members have significant expertise across all major storage technologies and applications. Our main priority as EASE is to ensure that the EU regulatory and policy framework is favorable for the deployment of all energy storage technologies. So we aim to raise awareness, share information, and build open communication links between EU policymakers and energy storage stakeholders. So we take a technology neutral approach to promoting a fair and future-oriented energy market design, which really recognizes storage as an indispensable element of the energy system. So it's this diverse membership that we have that gives us quite a unique view of the storage market from all angles of the value chain. And this, together with the market expertise from Delta EE, has helped us create a really comprehensive market monitor on energy storage, which we will share with you today. So there have been a number of changes in the energy storage landscape over the past year, and most notably the acceleration of the energy transition under the REPowerEU plan. This, of course, has many positive implications for energy storage, especially as the accelerated build-out of renewables will require significant levels of new storage capacity. However, if we go to the next slide, if we take a look at the historic deployment rates of storage of approximately 1 gigawatt per year versus the actual energy system needs by 2030, we see quite a huge disparity between the two. And just to elaborate a bit, so the energy system needs that we show here in green is based on a review study by EASE, which will in fact be published this week, where we estimate that approximately 200 gigawatts of energy storage will be required by 2030 to accommodate high shares of renewable energy in line with EU climate targets today. So this means essentially that we need to ramp up storage to at least 14 gigawatts per year in order to achieve this. So there's clearly a significant mismatch between historic deployment rates and the actual energy system needs, and really highlights the urgent need to boost deployment today, especially as wind and solar installations continue to grow. Because we'll really not be able to integrate these high shares of wind and solar in the energy system without energy storage, as it provides critical grid flexibility, reliability services, as well as energy shifting services. So this is shifting and storing large amounts of energy when there's excess renewable generation, for example, avoiding curtailment, and also alleviating grid congestion. So all of which are common issues seen in regions with high shares of variable renewables in their systems today. In a case where we do not have enough energy storage in the system, we will not only fail to meet the REPowerEU targets, but will also be locked into fossil fuel flexibility, which will of course further jeopardize the EU's security of supply. So this is really a critical issue, and it needs to be addressed, and this massive ramp up in storage deployment will only really be possible with a clear energy storage strategy and accompanying targets. So this approach has paved the way and is paving the way already in other sectors today, which we see quite clearly so already for the renewable sector and hydrogen sector, where targets are driving deployment of technologies and stimulating the necessary investments. And a second important point, which is also critical to accelerate the storage uptake, requires significant changes in legislation. So especially around market design that rewards storage for the value that it brings to the energy system. And my colleague Jacopo will elaborate this in more detail in the European context today. And with that, I'll hand over to John, who will tell us a bit more about this year's European Market Monitor and energy storage.
Susan, if I may, just there's a question come in around the chart there about the 1 gigawatt per year line that you've illustrated. Is that illustrative in terms of the historical trend, or is that?
Yeah, that would be based on maybe 2019, 2020 numbers. Deployment for batteries, approximately 1 gigawatt.
Right. Okay. So it's not a forecast as such. It's just an extension of historical trends.
An extension.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you, John. Over to you.
Thank you. So this year is the 6th that Delta EE and EES have produced a storage market monitor. And I think it's probably the first year that we could say that battery storage has really come of age in the way that wind and solar did when we stopped talking about them as alternative energy and they really just became part of the energy mix. In 2021, we achieved 1 gigawatt residential installations of battery storage in the year and exceeded a total of 3 gigawatts of total batteries in the whole year. In 2022, our forecast is that by the end of the year, we'll install 5 gigawatts in the year, bringing total cumulative battery capacity over 10 gigawatts for the first time. And it's not just that we're seeing more installations, but batteries are getting bigger. In 2021, we saw 48 projects larger than 10 megawatts, and only 16 of them were larger than 50 megawatts. In 2022, out of 59 projects bigger than 10 megawatts, more than half, 33 projects, are expected to be more than 50 megawatts. So having 1.8 gigawatts from 154 grid-connected batteries in 2021, we're expecting 2.6 gigawatts from fewer than half of that number in 2022, and we're already seeing 2.4 gigawatts of capacity from just 35 projects that we're expecting in 2023. Next slide, please. But there is uncertainty beyond the announced and contracted projects, particularly around supply chain issues, where shipping delays and high prices are increasing the risk that projects are delayed or cancelled. We've seen the prices of the core minerals rising, but it takes time to develop new supplies. We can see from this chart from Benchmark Minerals Intelligence, who've really emerged over the last few years of one of the leading analysts in the upstream space for minerals around battery chemistries and the minerals required for the energy transition, that the price of lithium has risen fourfold over just the last year. And that's increasing the cost of battery projects, exacerbating the delays from shipping and supply chain issues. And they've had a wider impact than just batteries. The cost of living crisis is seeing the impact of rising energy costs and food prices. And it's quite possible that disposable income generally will reduce, impacting the expected rise of EVs and residential battery installations as people hold on to their cars longer and choose not to invest in domestic batteries. However, the expected growth in grid-scale batteries are likely to reflect the increasing price in energy prices. So the mineral issues are going to have less of an impact for grid-scale storage, but they will still lead to new innovations in battery chemistries. We've already seen a move from NMC to LFP, and by the end of the decade, we're likely to see a further change in a further emergence of new battery chemistries that are less reliant on lithium, particularly for stationary storage. We're also seeing the return to growth of pumped hydro projects, particularly in Spain and potentially in Greece, as part of a move towards longer duration storage, where increasing needs for 8, 12-hour storage or even multi-day storage will be required by the end of the decade, and the short-term markets become saturated. We're also likely to see the growth in heat storage as energy becomes a multi-vector industry rather than having separation of electricity, heat and transport. A further factor making forecasts a little difficult towards the end of the decade is the impact of government intervention. Only a few countries have defined targets, and we expect those targets to be beaten by market requirements. Tenders and auctions are taking place, whether it's for renewables requiring co-location of storage or capacity mechanisms that now allow storage to participate. And the participation of storage in the tenders and energy markets is another factor that we are going to see improvements in market accessibility and participation towards the end of the decade, as storage really becomes part of the energy mix and not a separate issue. So if you move to the next slide, this has really led to a revision in how we address the market monitor. And we've rebuilt our database from the ground up over the last few months. We've actually increased the number of projects since this video was recorded and have nearly 3,000 individual battery projects covering nearly 30 countries across Europe. We reflect the emergence of the value chain, with specialist storage funds investing in battery storage, separation of construction risk and operations, and battery optimizers who are engaging with the market specifically to trade batteries. We've developed a portal that allows users to click through and investigate the data, and we're tracking development of projects by country, customer segment, location, status, and by the companies that are involved in the different stages. And it's not just battery storage. We include pumped hydro, compressed air, flywheels, and other technologies in the portal, and we're adding to the data constantly. The portal is available both to EES members and Delta EE storage subscribers, and we're grateful for the participation of the companies who've spoken to produce the data. We did a combination of secondary research and primary research to develop what we believe is probably the most extensive and detailed database of storage projects in Europe.
Cool, thanks John for sharing that with us. Just before we move on to Jacopo's section on regulatory update, just a couple of clarification points around Europe and the GB. It's a simple point but quite important. You know, when Susan, the chart you showed, was that for EU 27 or did it include the UK or GB market? And when John, the numbers you showed, is that when we talk about Europe, do we include the GB market? Susan, you first.
Yeah, we did in our projections include the UK in those numbers, the overall assessment, yeah.
And John?
Yeah, same with portal and our numbers. It covers EU countries and others, including the UK and Switzerland.
Yeah, okay. I think generally at Delta E, when we talk about Europe, we include UK as part of Europe because it still is part of Europe despite the recent events in the political world. Okay, thanks guys. Jacopo, just move on to your section for the regulatory update.
Indeed, talking about political changes. Of course, the big political change that really has shaken Europe and European Union policymakers in the past few months has been, of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It has been a rough awakening. Of course, the dependency of Russian fossil fuel was something known, but I think many policymakers are really calm to understand what can be the impact of such a dependency. So in May, we have had the European Commission's proposal to address this dependency through 3 different set of objectives: saving energy, producing clean energy, and diversifying the EU energy supply. The way this can be achieved, according to the European Commission, is through a mix of reform and significant investments. What is on the table right now is something that I think 5-6 months ago was, not even under the consideration of both national and EU policymakers. So in general, starting with a general consideration, we foresee big changes both at the country level and at the EU continental level. If we go forward into the next line, maybe we can talk about what precisely REPowerEU proposes. In general, let's say we can divide the expected provisions to be having either an indirect positive impact of energy storage or a direct positive impact on energy storage. The number of initiatives that have an indirect impact is huge, from the increasing the headline for the 2030 targets for renewable for 40 to 45%, to the increase from 9% to 13% in the binding energy efficiency target, double the solar photovoltaic capacity by 2025, and improve the permitting process for renewables. These are all things that, one way or another, will definitely push for energy storage uptake. Unfortunately, in REPowerEU, we've seen that the direct mentioning of energy storage, or the actual actions that go a bit further than just a narrative, are quite limited. There is a recognition of the role of energy storage, for example, for system flexibility, or in the context of renovations. And this is, again, something quite big. Maybe in the past we were seeing energy storage being mentioned for the energy transition, of course, but now it's being discussed more from a gas dependency perspective. This is a big change in the policymakers' narrative. And we're also seeing permitting processes and the issue of permitting processes being addressed. And again, this was one of the non-regulatory barriers that many of the EES members often quote as a big limitation and something having a big impact on the business case. If we go forward, we can see to the next slide. We can see that at this moment, the EU is, in a certain sense, in an unusual situation, because from one side, of course, we have the clean energy package, which is this big package which was announced back in 2016 and then implemented in the past few years at the member state level, which is very ambitious. And now then we have Fit for 55, so also the COVID-related initiatives that really try to make the EU a leading entity in the fight against climate change. At the same time, when we look precisely at the energy storage initiatives, there's something missing. The market designs probably needs to be changed as soon as possible to reward the services that energy storage provides. This is something at the moment really under discussed. And also, we don't really have clear investment signals for investors. We see our industrial, our members coming from the industry, who maybe receive from time to time mixed signals from the EU, and we need something more. And maybe if we go to the next slide, we see what exactly we need. We need a market design that tries to possibly discuss how to reward energy storage for long periods of time. They very much discuss long duration energy storage, and here we talk not only about days, but we're talking about months and seasons. This is something that at the moment in Europe, but to be fair in the world, there's no more product for. And if we do see the European Union being able to develop one, the energy storage uptake will dramatically increase. We will see many new technologies coming. And the second is a change we would like to see, and we think it's something to be expected in terms of market design, is to try to maybe see if this dependency of gas peakers for backup generation is still something acceptable for policymakers. Right now, when we see capacity markets, auctions, we still see domination from peakers. We have seen maybe last year in Italy, surprisingly, batteries being able to win where maybe they were not expected to win, but still there is a dominance of fossil fuel solutions that if we change the rule of the games, will not be we will not witness at all. Of course, what is missing is a strategy for energy storage at the EU level. It's something that such strategy exists, for example, for hydrogen, and the Parliament has the intention to develop an energy storage strategy. Unfortunately, the European Commission has not decided yet to pick up this recommendation. And said before, this is a very big missed opportunity because we will have clear investment signals and we will have a much higher uptake than we witness now. So if we go to the next slide, we can try to summarize what we can expect if we look at the legislation, if we look at the policy world, if we look at EU bubble, what can we derive from and how does that influence our forecasts? The first point is that energy storage uptake will increase. The EU's effort on the decarbonization of the energy systems are so ambitious, the commitment is so high that growth for energy storage is ensured. Yet, for the next few years, we could expect some untapped potential until we have a EU strategy, and that's going to take some time. And until we see a new market design, and that's going to take years, we will not have the growth that probably energy storage would be otherwise see, and we will not see all the services that otherwise energy storage will provide. And with this, I pass the microphone, the virtual microphone, back to Delta E to see if indeed what our market monitor says.
Okay, thanks, Jacopo. Just before we move on to John and Lucy for the market monitor, there's a question come in about the ownership of storage. You know, are DSOs allowed to own storage in the EU? Will they be allowed to own storage in the EU going forward?
This is something where the EU is quite clear. No, regulated entities are not allowed to own storage, something that was discussed in the clean energy package. There are some exemptions for security in case the market is not able to provide an energy storage flexibility, but the general rules is that no, DSOs and TSOs are not allowed to own storage.
Do you think that's one of the factors holding energy storage back at all? Is that hindering development of the market, or is that a positive thing for the market?
I think in general we should have competition, we should have best technology win, we should have the best provider win. That said, I think at a certain point we will have to try to understand how to have different revenue streams for energy storage operated by DSOs. We should try to think how maybe the same facility could be used at a certain moment by DSOs and by other moments by the market, because this is something that on paper is allowed by current legislation, but is not precisely elaborated in the legislation. So the general rule so far is probably good, but there is a clear need to discuss the minutiae, to discuss the details, and go just over this foundation.
Yeah, indeed, it's quite a complex, subtle topic, I think. Thank you, Jacopo. Right, on to the highlights from the EMMES 6 report. John and Lucy, pass over to you.
Thank you, Andy and Jacopo. So first, looking backwards, I think it's clear from this chart how the the battery storage market has really grown in the last couple of years. And it's not just changing absolute numbers from that 1 gigawatt trend that we saw in the chart at the start to 3 and then 5 over the last few years and the current year, but also that the market's moved from being dominated by Great Britain and Germany, and there are many more countries now that we see installing significant capacities of batteries across the whole of Europe. So we do expect this year to be the first where 5 gigawatts of batteries are installed across Europe. But going forward, we do see some headwinds, at the very least in the short term, particularly the lithium deficit, which is largely a reflection of the expected growth of EVs, and the stationary storage is a small proportion of the total battery production capacity when it's put to use. So we do see significant volumes of projects already announced for 2023 and multiple gigawatts in 2024, 25 and 2026, but not at the expected level that we would want to see for continued growth. So our expectation is that there's a likely plateau in battery installations over the next 3 to 4 years before growth returns towards the end of the decade, reflecting either the new supplies of lithium being brought online to address the deficit, or new chemistries achieving commercial viability and addressing the challenges in the batteries in the storage market, whether competing with lithium ion in the short term or addressing the challenges for long duration storage.
Thanks, John. So now we've got a series of sort of snapshots into the core countries for energy storage. And as John just mentioned, GB or Great Britain has been one of the leading countries in installations. I mean, we're just over 3.5 gigawatts at the moment, rising to not shy of 14.5 gigawatts by 2030. And that's primarily motivated by this 13 gigawatts of front of meter installations. As you can see on the graphs here, front of meter really is the majority of the installations in the GB market. These installations have a lot of incentives from the flexibility market. National Grid ESO, which is the transmission system operator in the GB market, just released a suite of new ancillary services. One in particular, dynamic containment, is very favourable to front of meter batteries. And this is a partial reason for the big spike that you see in 2022 and 2023. I should also mention the spike is also partly due to sort of delay in COVID, and now we're seeing sort of the pipeline increase. A couple of other points on the GB market, similar to what John said, we're not expecting this such rapid growth to continue all the way to 2030. Given that we're 6 months into 2022 now, if we saw this growth continue towards 2024, we would expect to see more named projects already announced. And unfortunately, we're not seeing that at the moment, partly again due to the technical issues with lithium. But I don't want to put too much of a downer on it in the sense that it's still a very well-developed market. We are still seeing growth. And what we're specifically seeing in the GB market is a specialization in the storage value chain. Susan mentioned it at the beginning of the presentation, and we're very much seeing that in practice. We're seeing aggregators for the smaller assets, we're seeing traders, we're seeing people specialize just in battery storage, which is a key highlight for such a developed market. It's no longer one service provider trying to do everything. We're very much seeing a specialization and sort of a segmentation of the storage value chain.
Thanks,
Germany,
Lucy. Thanks, Lucy. Perhaps just take a question on GB while we're on that slide. There's a question come in around the UK ancillary services markets becoming saturated. In which case, why do we still see growth of large-scale projects in the GB market?
That's a very good question. In a short answer, it's the idea of value stacking. A few years ago, you had one value stream and you played most of your assets into that one value stream. We're seeing a transition away from that, from stacking value streams. That could be your ancillary services, your dynamic containment, your FCRs, and in addition to that, your wholesale market, your balancing mechanism, potentially even networks. So it's very much the holistic view of stacking rather than just going for one single value stream.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Lucy. And just sort of clarification on these charts, really, a couple of questions I think have come in around what's included. Are they only chemical batteries on these charts, or does it include other mechanical or thermal batteries, for example?
so these charts specifically are chemical batteries, electrochemical batteries.
Yeah. Okay, so it doesn't include any other form of storage. Okay, thanks, guys. Sorry, John. On to Germany.
So Germany is quite a contrast to the GB in that it's really being driven by the residential market. From the expected growth in 2022, we're likely to see a gigawatt of residential installations. And the front of meter market is really much smaller in comparison. However, we are expecting over the next few years to see the big grid booster batteries that are being installed to address network constraints to come online. After that, then we are expecting the increased need for flexibility and the transfer of business models from other countries around Europe to increase the investment in front of meter grid scale batteries for taking advantage of the merchant trading opportunities to lead to a growth in the front of meter market in Germany. But still, the domestic, the residential market is still likely to be a big driver of growth.
And then moving on to Italy, which is almost a combination of GB and Germany. It's one of the few markets where we're seeing growth in both the residential and the front of meter sector. The growth in the residential sector is motivated by a government subsidy called the Super Bonus, and it's a capex subsidy on energy efficiency measures that includes battery storage and PV. And that accounts for the large spike you see in 2022. Although given that the subsidy is ending next year, we anticipate growth in the residential market to reduce before increasing slightly again to 2030, when there will be no longer a need for a government-backed subsidy. In terms of the front of meter market, primarily motivated by their fast reserve, which is their fastest acting ancillary service, and the capacity market. However, there is a little bit of uncertainty around the longevity of these value streams, because as yet we're unsure whether they're going to be renewed. They're sort of at the tender process at the moment, and we don't know if there's going to be another capacity auction in the future to sort of ensure prolonged value streams. However, the Italian market is one of the few markets that has a secure target of 6 gigawatts of storage by 2030. So that includes both battery storage and other forms of storage. So that's 3 gigawatts of battery storage by 2030. Given the size of Italy geographically, it's quite a large country, and its relative isolation from mainland Europe, we do expect Italy to exceed that 3 gigawatts of battery storage by 2030. So where there is a little bit of uncertainty in terms of the specific value streams that these batteries will access, we are fairly confident that there is still a very much of a growth market in Italy, and it's definitely a market to keep an eye on.
Again, in contrast, France is a relatively small market up to date, although with the increasing unreliability of the nuclear fleet, it's quite possible that the need for storage, the need for flexibility in the French market may exceed our forecasts. However, up to now, what we've seen is relatively small projects and very few large projects of the scale that we're seeing, particularly in the GB market. But we are seeing companies, for example, Harmony Energy, moving from their roots in the GB market, looking to replicate their business model in France. Residential flexibility is less of a driver for investment in storage. The market's currently dominated by Voltalis, and we don't see a huge opportunity for residential batteries. And again, in contrast to Italy, the interconnections that France has and the participation in market coupling means that the flexibility needs from the TSO in particular may be met through those market coupling mechanisms, reducing the need for domestic, in terms of within France flexibility, if it can be procured from outside of the country.
So moving on to Ireland, given how relatively small Ireland is as a country, they have a large amount of primarily front of meter storage. This is partly driven by their DS3 systems, which is their equivalent of ancillary services. They're very fast acting and they're very technically challenging, which makes it a positive market. Couple that with Ireland's very high renewable targets. It's about 70% by 2030. Both of those things make it a very attractive market for front of meter batteries. However, the other side of that is, as John was mentioning, in France and the interconnected nature of their systems, there is a plan for an interconnect between Ireland and France. Even when that goes ahead, that will reduce the islanded nature of the Irish market, which is partly why you see this sort of sharp decrease from 2021 and 2022 onwards. Ireland is still a very attractive market, but the short-term immediate need for resilience, for renewable generation and their ancillary services will lessen over time, especially as they increase their interconnection with mainland Europe and potentially also the GB market.
And finally, in our country snapshots, I think it's the wild card, and this is Greece, which has recently announced a target of 3 gigawatts of storage by 2030, and has been highlighting an auction for storage that has been due to take place for a number of months, if not years now, and is currently expected to take place in Q3 this year, that could fund 700 megawatts of storage. Now, every announcement of that auction has led to battery projects applying for generation licenses, and we're seeing 16 gigawatts of battery projects, as well as 3 gigawatts of pumped hydro projects that already have approval for a generation license. Given the target, it's highly unlikely that all of these will actually be built. However, the interconnections with the rest of Europe, the ability of, or the growth of renewables, particularly solar, and requirements for co-location of storage with renewable projects, means that our expectation is that the Greek target of 3 gigawatts by 2030 is likely to be exceeded with the new projects.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Lucy. Before we, there's quite a few questions come in on the countries. So before perhaps we summarise, maybe it'd be a good moment just to respond to one or two of those. People have asked, have we got similar snapshots for other countries like Sweden, Belgium, Netherlands?
Short answer is yes. There's 12 core countries that we have snapshots. Are you going to test my memory? Belgium, Finland, France, GB, Germany, Ireland, Italy, Sweden, Finland, I said Sweden, Switzerland, and Spain.
Okay, good effort, Lucy.
They're featured in the report that subscribers and members will receive after the webinar. We also cover nearly 30 countries in the portal, which is also accessible to subscribers and members.
Okay, so we do the snapshots on, say, top dozen or so, but there's about 30 countries included in the data portal. Okay, and then a couple of people noticed that Spain wasn't listed on the label. I think that's just because it's probably not on the label.
We have too many countries to show on the legend.
Yeah, okay, but it includes all 30 countries that we've looked at. Okay, understood.
And we have a specific snapshot on Spain as well.
Yeah, okay. John, somebody picked up on your comment about Germany grid support batteries and DSOs not being allowed to have batteries in Germany. So perhaps could you just explain or clarify what you meant by that?
Yes, so as Jacopo mentioned, the principle is that network operators are not allowed to own batteries except in particular circumstances. That's the principle that's, that has been developed over time. So we have seen, for example, the first grid scale GB battery in the GB was actually on a substation owned by a DSO that eventually became part of a wider consortium. In Germany, there are particular issues with transmission constraints, and the batteries that are addressing those issues will not be allowed to participate in the ancillary services markets and will effectively be considered part of the grid infrastructure rather than merchant batteries that we're seeing in other countries.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, let me allow me to sort of let you summarize your findings from the EMMES report, and then there's quite a few questions that we can come back to at the end.
So the key takeaways are that we are expecting the cumulative installation of batteries in Europe to reach 10 gigawatts in 2022, that should say, and 50 gigawatts by 2030. There is a lithium deficit, which is going to challenge the ongoing acceleration of growth over the next 2 to 3 years, but we're still expecting around 5 gigawatts of batteries to be installed year on year before increasing towards the end of the decade. In our database, we have 40 gigawatts of installed pumped hydro. So the current capacity is still dominated by pumped hydro. However, by 2030, we think storage capacity will be roughly even between pumped hydro with new additions and the growth in batteries for both to be above 50 gigawatts. However, despite this growth in storage, we'll still expect on current run rates and current forecasts, we expect storage capacity to be significantly short of the 200 gigawatts that has identified as being required. So over the next 8 years, we do need to see changes in policy, regulations, market access, and innovation in technology to allow us to meet the target required to allow the growth in renewable generation.
Great, thank you, John. There's quite a few questions have come in, so we've got a few minutes now to turn to the ones we haven't talked about already. A couple of people asked about the slides. We'll be sharing the slides after the webinar, so the slides will be available to everybody. But also people have asked John about the data portal that you demonstrated briefly earlier on. When is that going to be available, or what's the way forward for that for EASE members to access it?
So currently finalising the setup of the portal. So that should be available with a login to EES members and Delta EE storage subscribers over the next few days. Anyone who's not a member or a subscriber should get in contact with myself or Susan, and but then we can explain the portal and the wider benefits of membership and subscription.
Great. Okay, thanks, John. And we are intending to keep that up to date as a sort of paid for a service going forward, I think, and we'll certainly be communicating more details on that in due course. A few questions have come in around the sort of the different segments of the storage market, front of the meter versus CNI versus residential. You know, CNI is tiny in comparison to the others, I think. Residential is tiny in most countries, certainly compared to front of the meter. I mean, you know, I think there's a number of questions come in, but, you know, why do you see different pictures in different countries? What are the key drivers or variables that determine the size of the, you know, behind the meter and the front of meter storage markets? John or Lucy?
I can go first. I think maybe I'll address the CNI first because it's a common thread throughout Europe. It's a relatively niche market. There are a few CNI assets, but they're generally related for resilience purposes with ancillary services or flexibility and an additional benefit. That said, there are some moves for data centers in Ireland to have CNI storage, again as a backup, but the data centers in Ireland are increasing. So there's a potential small market in Ireland for CNI, but outside of niche cases, it's limited. And then a quick point on front of meter, primarily motivated by ancillary services. So if there are value streams that are fast acting, so an SCR, or in many markets even faster, so the Nordics have them, Ireland, GB, Italy, those are the markets that batteries have traditionally gravitated towards, and I imagine will do so in the coming years.
And particularly on picking up on residential, the two markets where we are seeing big residential markets. First of all, Italy, that's really being driven by the super bonus, which is paying residential consumers for the installation of storage. That's likely to stretch into next year, but then once that subsidy goes, then we see the market dropping off relatively substantially. Whereas in Germany, the growth of residential solar and the high energy tariffs means that the incentive for maximizing self-consumption of solar is highly incentivized, and the use of storage to do that is the driver behind that market.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Somebody's asked about the value stacks. Lucy, you commented on that for the UK earlier on. Do we have, I know it's not the scope of the EMMES report, but do we have any research or insights on the value stacks or value stream stacks per country, if you like, across Europe? Is that something that we've been working on, perhaps in the flexibility research you guys do?
I was going to say, we focus primarily on the value stacks in the Flex service, or the flexibility research service. We, in January, I think it was, we published a very similar report to the EMMES, but primarily focusing on ancillary services. So the short answer is yes, there is a free version of that on our website. If you have a look, it's on the Flex page. And obviously, we know far more than we can say in this relatively short amount of time. But I guess as a key takeaway, the markets are opening for flexibility and value stacking. The clean energy package is a key driver behind that. So going forwards, if the clean energy package is implemented the way that it should be, we will have an open and accessible market for both storage and flexibility. I say in an ideal world, there's variations in markets as to how well the clean energy package is being implemented, but hopefully in the coming years, markets will increasingly open to both flex and storage.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Lucy. So that the market monitor on flexibility was in association with Smarten, wasn't it? Another industry association. So there is, as Lucy says, there is a public report available on our website, but obviously for our subscribers, we have a lot more detail available. Somebody's asked about the sort of the e-mobility market, or sort of V2G eating the stationary storage market. Do you have any views on the degree to which over this time horizon the stationary storage market will be impacted by the storage available from electric vehicles?
So over this time horizon, I think we're more likely to see a material impact from smart charging of electric vehicles, so timing when they're being charged rather than sending power back to the grid. As Lucy mentioned, there are issues, there are increased costs in aggregating small assets and building up to a scale that's going to compete with the big grid scale batteries in these markets. And our expectation is that in the timescale that we're looking at, vehicle to grid is likely to grow, but still be dwarfed by the front of meter batteries.
Okay, thanks, John. Jacopo, perhaps final question on the more on the policy side. There's a question about common policies across Europe, different countries in Europe that constitute the main drivers for more storage integration. You know, is it right? Is it being driven at a European level? And are the key drivers for countries coming out of Brussels, or are the key drivers actually on a national basis, and it's driven more by what national governments are doing?
I think any energy storage regulation legislation is always based on two aspects. The first one is the energy storage aspect, so the general one, and then is the technology specific legislation. Today, for example, we spoke a lot about batteries. Batteries legislation at the moment is very much national based. It will become something that the EU dictates and that it's implemented across Europe. You know, it's something that the EU has been working on for the past few years, and we expect at the end of 2022 to be implemented equally with no difference across the whole EU member states. Then, of course, if we see the general framework, so the energy storage non-technology specific legislation, there is quite a few aspects that are decided at the EU level, but usually we tend to see coming out of Brussels directives that then are transposed into national legislation, and we've seen with the clean energy package significant or some difference from country to country. So yeah, it's a bit of a mix between the two, I'd say.
Okay, thanks, Jacopo. So I mean, we're coming to 11 o'clock now, so in UK time, so I think I'll draw it to an end there. But perhaps just a final comment. I mean, how optimistic are you all that this gap between what 14 gigawatts per year, I think, Susan, you showed right at the beginning of the webinar, that we need, and 1 gigawatt also being added based on historical trends? How optimistic are each of you that that gap will be narrowed? Perhaps how optimistic are you that it will be narrowed completely versus, say, halfway? John, starting with you.
So I think, as Jacopo mentioned, we focus very much on batteries today. We are expecting markets to address the shortage of lithium. We're expecting markets to address that from bringing new battery technologies to market. But we're also expecting to see pumped hydro, hydrogen, flywheels, compressed air storage, and all sorts of other technologies come to market and really have an impact towards the end of the decade. So I think I'm optimistic overall. Some technologies will need an improvement in the policy environment to bring them to market, but I think that the market needs will be driven by the growth of renewables, that market need for flexibility, and that will ultimately send signals to fill the gap.
Okay, So optimistic. We're out of time there, guys. Sorry, I can't go across the panel on that one, but framed that quite poorly. But we're better end it there because the clock's just ticked over 11 o'clock in the UK. So wanted to thank you all for your contribution. Really interesting professional webinar. Thank you everyone in the audience for attending. Hope you found that very useful. As I said, we will be sending out the slides, and we answered a lot of the questions, but not all of them. So feel free to contact us directly if you'd like to discuss those issues following the webinar. But thank you for your time today, and I wish you all a good day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.